There is a moment right before something changes, when the body senses it before the mind can fully understand it. You have felt it before, that strange heaviness in your chest that appears without any warning. That sudden urge to check your phone even though you were not expecting a message. That unexpected memory that comes into your mind in the middle of the night when everything is quiet and you least expect it. You tell yourself it means nothing. You try to ignore it. You convince yourself that it is only a random thought or an old feeling passing through. But deep inside, a part of you knows that some emotions do not appear without a reason. Somewhere, right now, someone may be thinking about you in a way they have been trying not to admit. Someone may be going back through memories they believed they had already left behind. The distance between you, the silence, the unanswered questions, and the emotions that were never fully resolved may be reaching a point where they can no longer be ignored. This is not about predicting the future. It is about understanding human psychology. It is about the way the subconscious mind works when two people have created a deep, emotional connection. A connection that does not simply disappear because time passes or because two people are physically apart. Take a moment to think about that idea, because what you are about to hear may feel uncomfortable. Sometimes discomfort appears when we are facing something we have been avoiding for a very long time. Let us begin with the part that most people do not want to accept. You may have spent months or even years believing that distance was the reason everything became difficult. You may have believed that the miles between you were the real problem. That if only they were closer, if only the distance disappeared, if only the timing had been different, everything would somehow become easier. You imagined that the roads, the oceans, the different schedules, and the physical separation were the things standing between you. But maybe the deepest pain was never the distance itself. Maybe the real pain came from the silence, the unanswered questions, and the conversations you replayed in your mind over and over again. It came from the moments when you searched for hidden meanings in their words. The nights when you wondered if something important had been left unsaid. The times when you questioned whether the connection meant as much to them as it meant to you. This is where the human mind often becomes complicated. When people do not have answers, the mind tries to create them. When there is uncertainty, the brain fills the empty spaces. But instead of filling those spaces with truth, it often fills them with fear. It tells you that they have already moved on. It tells you that you cared more than they ever did. It tells you that maybe you imagined the connection. It tells you that holding on was a mistake. That story can feel incredibly real. It can feel as though your mind is protecting you from disappointment. It can feel like accepting the worst possibility will somehow make the pain easier to carry. But sometimes, what feels like protection is actually a way of avoiding a deeper truth. Sometimes the mind creates emotional distance because accepting that another person may still have feelings is even more frightening. If they still care, then the silence has a different meaning. If they still think about you, then maybe they were not cold or careless. Maybe they were struggling with emotions they did not know how to handle. Maybe they were trying to understand feelings they did not know how to express. Many people mistake emotional walls for wisdom. They believe that becoming numb means they have healed. They believe that shutting down means they have become stronger. But emotional walls are not always built from strength. Sometimes they are built from pain. Sometimes they come from moments when someone was hurt so deeply that avoiding their feelings seemed safer than facing them. Here is the part many people never admit. The hardest part of missing someone is not always the absence itself. The hardest part is wondering if you are the only one who still feels it. It is lying awake at night and asking yourself if you are still holding on to something the other person has already let go of. It is carrying a memory that still feels alive inside you while wondering if it still exists anywhere inside them. But there is something important you need to understand. People often carry emotions they never show. A person can continue with their daily life. They can work. They can smile. They can talk with other people. They can appear completely unaffected. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, they may still be processing emotions they have never truly faced. Somewhere in a life you cannot see and inside a mind you cannot reach, they may be fighting their own private battle. Not necessarily against you, not against the connection, but against themselves. Deep emotional bonds are not always easy to understand. They are not only about physical closeness, they are also about emotional patterns, memories, attachment, and the way two people influence each other's inner world. A meaningful connection does not always disappear simply because two people are apart. Sometimes distance does the opposite. Sometimes distance makes emotions even louder. When someone is constantly around us, daily life creates distractions. There are conversations, routines, responsibilities, and countless small moments that keep us from fully examining what we truly feel. But when that person is gone, when the noise fades away, the mind has more space to return to what was left unresolved. That is why memories suddenly appear. That is why certain places, songs, words, or moments can instantly bring someone back into your thoughts. The subconscious mind does not always follow logic. It does not measure feelings by miles or by time. It returns to emotions that still feel unfinished. An unresolved connection can remain active inside someone for a very long time. It can appear through dreams, sudden memories, unexpected sadness, or quiet moments when they realize something important feels missing. Imagine the version of them that continues living their normal life. They wake up. They go through their responsibilities. They speak with the people around them. They keep themselves busy. But underneath all of that, there may be a quieter part of them that still remembers you. Not in a dramatic way, and not always in a way they are ready to admit, but in the same way a familiar scent can suddenly bring back a memory you never intended to remember. The mind has a way of returning to what the heart has not fully released. Many people try to bury difficult emotions. They convince themselves they are fine. They tell themselves they have moved forward. They create distractions because facing the truth feels too overwhelming. But emotions that are pushed away do not always disappear. They often wait. They remain beneath the surface until something causes them to rise again. This is the part many people struggle to understand. When someone refuses to acknowledge a feeling, that feeling does not automatically lose its power. Sometimes it becomes even stronger because it has never been fully processed. Eventually, the emotions that were hidden begin asking to be noticed. That may be what is happening inside them now. The walls they built to protect themselves may be becoming harder to maintain. Not because of something happening outside of them, and not because someone forced them to change, but because the human mind cannot avoid unresolved emotions forever. Eventually, what has been buried finds its way back to the surface. And when that happens, it does not always arrive quietly. It can come as a sudden realization, a strong urge to reconnect, a feeling that something important has been left unfinished, or a need to stop pretending that the distance was only about physical space. Sometimes the hardest truth for a person to accept is that they never stopped caring. They only learned how to hide it. That clarity often arrives in a quiet way. It does not always come through a dramatic moment or a life-changing event. Sometimes it comes as a quiet but impossible to ignore realization that happiness was never truly about proving you could live completely on your own. It was never about becoming a person who needed nothing, someone who stayed away from emotional attachment, or someone who convinced themselves that close relationships were a weakness. Deep inside, it was always about finding your way back to something that truly mattered. It was about returning to a connection that remained valuable even through distance, silence, and uncertainty. Some connections do not simply disappear because two people stop speaking. Some emotions do not fade away just because someone tries to move on with life. They continue to exist quietly beneath everything else, patiently waiting for the moment when a person finally becomes honest with themselves. Now let's look more deeply at what happens inside the mind of someone who is finally reaching the point where they are emotionally prepared to return. Not only physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. Before someone takes a single step toward another person, there is often a long emotional journey taking place that nobody around them can see. There is a psychological experience called cognitive dissonance. It is the uncomfortable state that appears when a person's beliefs, decisions, and emotions no longer fit together. For a long time, the person who created the distance may have convinced themselves that staying away was the correct choice. They may have repeated to themselves that separation was the safest path. They may have believed that keeping emotional distance between you was the only way to protect themselves from being hurt. They may have seen independence as a sign of strength. They may have believed that depending on someone else meant giving up control. They may have tried to prove to themselves that they were completely happy on their own. But beneath all of that, another part of them still knew the truth. The part they tried so hard to silence continued remembering the connection, continued feeling the absence, and continued recognizing that something important was missing. There is a difference between simply being alone and actually feeling complete. Being alone can sometimes bring peace, but choosing distance while secretly wishing for closeness creates a very different emotional experience. It creates a quiet emptiness that follows a person, even when everything around them seems perfectly normal. Someone can keep themselves busy. They can focus on work, friendships, personal goals, and endless distractions. They can fill every hour of their schedule and convince themselves they have already moved on. But unresolved emotions have a way of finding their way back. When someone is carrying two completely opposite truths at the same time, it creates emotional pressure that becomes more difficult to ignore with every passing day. One part of their mind keeps saying, "Stay away, protect yourself, don't become vulnerable again." But another quiet voice keeps whispering, "This connection still matters. This person still matters." Deep inside, something about walking away never truly felt right. Living between these two realities becomes emotionally exhausting. The mind can only carry that inner conflict for so long before something begins to shift. Eventually, one side grows stronger than the other. Eventually, the energy required to keep maintaining the distance becomes heavier than the fear of reconnecting. That is the moment when the emotional walls slowly begin to crack. Not because the outside world suddenly changed, not because someone pressured them into making a decision, but because the emotional cost of pretending became greater than the fear of finally being honest. This is often the point many people reach before reconciliation becomes possible. It is usually the moment when someone understands that avoiding their emotions has never made those emotions disappear. It has only postponed the day when they finally have to face them. From the outside, this emotional shift may appear very small. It may look like finally answering a message. It may look like checking in after a long period of silence. It may look like admitting something they have been avoiding for a long time. It may look like choosing honesty instead of continuing to act as if everything is completely fine. But inside them, something much larger is taking place. It can feel as though years of emotional defenses are slowly falling apart. The identity they built around appearing unaffected becomes more difficult to hold on to. The image they created of being completely detached starts feeling less believable. The story they repeated to themselves about why distance was necessary slowly begins losing its strength. This is something many people fail to recognize. Before someone returns physically, they often return emotionally first. Long before the first message is sent, long before the conversation finally happens, and long before the distance begins to disappear, the mind quietly starts preparing for that possibility. They may have already imagined seeing you again. They may have pictured how you would respond. They may have thought carefully about what they would say first. They may have replayed old memories, meaningful conversations, and special moments that still carry emotional importance. The subconscious mind often begins preparing for important emotional experiences before the conscious mind is willing to admit what it truly wants. It creates different possibilities. It imagines different outcomes. It gently explores the idea of reconnecting, not because someone is trying to escape into fantasy, but because the human mind naturally prepares itself for situations that carry deep emotional meaning. When something truly matters, the brain tries to make it feel less overwhelming by imagining it over and over again. The unknown becomes less frightening once the mind has already visited it many times. So, if you have noticed small changes recently, they may not be as random as they seem. Maybe the silence has started feeling different. Maybe their way of communicating has become softer and warmer. Maybe their overall energy has changed. Maybe there was one small sign of openness where there used to be complete emotional distance. These moments are usually not as sudden as they appear. They are often the visible result of an invisible emotional process that has been unfolding quietly inside them for a long time. Most people spend their time searching for dramatic proof. They wait for one huge statement. They expect a powerful emotional confession. They imagine a perfect movie-like moment where everything changes in an instant. But real emotional transformation rarely happens that way. Most meaningful changes begin quietly. They grow inside private thoughts. They appear during moments of deep reflection. They happen when someone reaches for their phone, thinks about sending a message, stops themselves, and then repeats that same cycle over and over, until one day they finally give themselves permission to act. Sometimes the greatest emotional changes happen during the smallest and most ordinary moments. A person may look exactly the same on the outside while experiencing a complete transformation within. And you may already be much closer to that turning point than you realize. Now, it is important to talk about fear, because fear is often the final obstacle standing between emotional distance and emotional reunion. The deepest fear inside a meaningful relationship is not always the fear of losing another person. Sometimes it is the fear of losing yourself while loving someone deeply. It is the fear of discovering just how strongly another person can influence your emotions. It is the fear of admitting that someone's presence can bring comfort, peace, security, and the feeling of truly being understood. For some people, that level of connection feels frightening. Not because the relationship itself is wrong, but because it is incredibly powerful. It challenges the belief that they must always stay in control. It challenges the idea that they can remain untouched by emotions and unaffected by love. That is why some people push away the very thing they secretly long for. Not because they feel nothing, but because they feel far more than they know how to handle. The emotional intensity becomes overwhelming. The vulnerability feels uncomfortable. The possibility of being hurt again seems easier to accept than the possibility of needing someone once more. Yet the truth remains the same. Complete control has never truly existed in love. The strongest relationships are not built on perfect control, but on honesty, trust, emotional courage, and the willingness to let another person truly matter. The moment someone accepts this truth, the walls they spent so long building begin to lose their purpose. Little by little, fear no longer controls every decision. Instead, hope quietly begins taking its place, opening the door to conversations, understanding, healing, and the possibility of reconnecting in a way that feels more genuine than ever before.